Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon, and welcome to the next or latest edition of the Ashburn webinar series. I am going to be your presenter today, and my name is Stuart Otto. I say good morning because it's noon on the Eastern time, so we got some people on the East Coast listening in, but then also people in Central and all over the country, basically. So good morning and good afternoon to wherever you are. Thank you for taking the opportunity to absorb some of this information again, and I definitely appreciate it. So I think without further ado, we're going to kind of dive right into this and go over the topic that we're going to discuss today, which is going to be the basics of Medicaid compliant annuities. And specifically, we're going to talk about annuities in general, and then we're going to dive into the two basic scenarios in which the annuities are utilized. So it is a basic presentation on gifted annuity planning and spousal planning as well, and also with annuities, but it'll be really good to build that foundation if you're new to the elder law industry or Medicaid field specifically. So look forward to talking about this with you. So let's go ahead and get into the presentation here really quick. All right, 1 second here. All right, so the next slide. So before we talk about that, I do want to discuss briefly who we are. So Ashburn is a national wholesaler of Medicaid compliant annuities. Essentially, basically, we provide Medicaid compliant annuities to essentially every state. And we also provide the planning analysis and spend down support to put these annuities in place. So complementary planning analysis can be suggestions on how to move the assets so that we're Medicaid compliant, but we're also maximizing Medicaid eligibility for an individual. And then we also work primarily with A-rated insurance carriers, even on our real short-term annuities that we sell through American Century. But we do also work with carriers like Standard and Nationwide as well. And overall, we've been in this industry over 15 years. Me personally, I've been doing this type of planning for over 10 years. And our administrative assistant, Jessica, she's been doing this work as well too for going on 15 years as well too. So even from like the Medicaid planners and the important process of processing the applications, we have experience all around in the industry. So really great resources to go to with any questions you have. So our primary product, as we already sort of brought up here, is the Medicaid compliant annuity, which we often refer to as the MCA. In addition to that, though, we do offer tax deferred annuities, both for Medicaid purposes and then also for individuals who are just looking for another investment option. And then we also offer irrevocable funeral trusts and single premium whole life policies. These are guaranteed issue contracts, so there's no underwriting involved, but they both essentially act as whole life insurance. The one difference is that the funeral trust essentially operates like a whole life insurance policy, but is irrevocably assigned to the funeral home. But those can be great additional spend down tools when you have less assets to essentially work with. And then lastly, we do also work with long-term care insurance cases as well on the pre-planning side, mostly with hybrid long-term care insurance policies, but that's another branch of the business that we do specialize in. And then our services, we talked about this a little bit, complementary case analysis, annuity quotes, that's suggestions on how to spend down on one client's resources. And then the spend down support, primarily that involves a lot of IRAs, IRA transactions, and then also just assistance with getting the application filled out correctly. We do as much as we can on the application, since you're a lot of times paying a fee to our office for the service of processing the application. We want to be as involved in as much as possible in filling out the application, so there's no issues once we actually get the forms in hand. And then after the case has been processed, we're still available to obviously process any death claims that come up if the client predeceases the term of the annuity, or also in the unlikely event the client's denied for Medicaid, which, you know, if you've been doing this for many years, you realize that there might always be a fly in the ointment somewhere that just wants to change things up and, you know, make life difficult in when processing applications. So you kind of never know when, you know, a Medicaid denial might come up, even if you're doing everything perfect to a T. but it's reassuring, I would hope, for an attorney who's looking for an annuity provider, that our office, Ashbur, we provide that fair hearing support as part of our services. So that's a free service we provide if there is ever a denial for Medicaid benefits. Okay, so let's go into what a Medicaid compliant annuity is. I'm not going to go into the specific, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. And we do have a whole nother presentation devoted to really hammering the specifics of a Medicaid compliant annuity. Because what I find with attorneys, and everyone, a lot of people know that, when we look at the DRA requirements, we know basically like the back of our hand, the 5 DRA requirements that needs to be irrevocable, non-assignable, actuarially sound, provide equal payments, and list the state as beneficiary. But what I think is even more important to understanding those rules is to also understand how to verify that when reviewing an annuity contract for Medicaid compliance. So the first thing is that we have to understand the 2 basic types of annuities. To understand Medicaid compliant annuities, we have to know the 2 basic types, which are immediate and deferred. And I use a word association with these 2 annuity types. Immediate is income and deferred is growth. So deferred is often, I shouldn't say often, is always going to have a cash value, whereas an immediate annuity is a structured income stream, kind of like a structured settlement, if you will, similar to that. But it's going to provide income guaranteed for a specific period of time. You see these types of annuities primarily in retirement accounts after they've matured, or if somebody retires from employment and they start taking retirement benefits, you might see that income get put into a structure like an immediate annuity. So basically, the immediate annuity provides income, the deferred annuity provides growth, and the deferred annuities I also lump in as well. So if you've heard things like the variable annuities or index annuities, that really gets lumped into the deferred annuity because that's all part of the growth component of that annuity type. So for Medicaid purposes, our Medicaid compliant annuities need to be immediate annuities. So these annuities need to be structured income streams. They cannot have cash value, so it cannot be deferred. And so a lot of times what we refer to our Medicaid compliant annuities as is a single premium immediate annuity, or in the insurance world, we call it a SPIA. So, and the annuity obviously too is going to be structured within the terms or rules of the Deficit Reduction Act. But it is very important to note, and I cannot stress this enough, the section here at the bottom, that although Medicaid compliant annuities are considered immediate annuities, not all immediate annuities are Medicaid compliant. So when you get an annuity contract from a client when you're evaluating their assets, you want to make sure that that annuity is Medicaid compliant. Just because it's an immediate annuity and it has a structured income stream doesn't necessarily mean that it's Medicaid compliant. So just be on the lookout for that if that ever comes up. And here's some of a little bit of an overview on what some of the characteristics are of a Medicaid compliant annuity. Again, there's another presentation I did, I think it was last May or June, that goes into the details of how to evaluate these types of contracts. But basically, some of the characteristics of the Medicaid compliant annuity is that you cannot have a cash surrender value. The annuity must be irrevocable to all policy provisions. The annuity must be non-assignable, meaning you can't transfer it to Jim Bob Smith down the street, and it essentially has to be irrevocable to you only, so you can't move it to somebody else. The payout options should not contain any sort of life component because that jeopardizes the actuarial sound test. It would be great if every annuity contract had a provision that says this annuity is actuarially sound, but we don't. So it's like we got to be able to find language in the contract that we use to interpret whether or not an annuity is actuarially sound. So one of those being the life component. So these annuities must have a period certain, meaning they must have a beginning point and an end point. Life options, typically their end point is when the client passes away. There's no structured date where that annuity ceases payment. The annuity must not also have inflation riders. So that'll violate the equal payment provision in the Deficit Reduction Act. So no inflation riders. We want to keep level payments for every single annuity that we're doing, and no balloon payments. There are scenarios where we may suggest or consider a balloon annuity, but in very rare circumstances. So generally speaking, try not to do any balloon annuities for Medicaid compliant purposes. All right, so that's a little bit of an intro into the Medicaid compliant annuity product itself. Again, we do cover that in another webinar if you want more information on that. I think I go into great detail on that, so definitely check that out. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the Medicaid compliant annuity and apply it to two different types of scenarios. The first scenario is going to be a spend down that's involving a gift. So these types of cases generally involve a single Medicaid applicant, a widow a lot of times, who reside in a nursing home or other long-term care facility like an assisted living or supportive care facility. For income purposes, the gross income is typically, or should be, I shouldn't say typically, is less than the facility cost. Because if the gross income is greater than what the facility cost is, then there's no need because they're income sufficient to pay for the nursing home. So they already have income eligibility established, but what they don't have established is asset eligibility. So too many assets to qualify. So that's where we come in with the annuity solution. So the goals of this case are to, again, establish the asset eligibility by spending down below the resource allowance and using an annuity to do that. And we also want to maintain income eligibility because remember, a Medicaid compliant annuity is an immediate annuity or income annuity. So the annuity, Medicaid annuity, is going to provide income, but we want to make sure that income isn't too much to where it's going to violate that income eligibility rule with Medicaid. So that's what we're doing is we're establishing asset eligibility, maintaining income eligibility, and achieving what we call an otherwise eligible status. So you'll hear that term thrown around a lot when you're talking about these types of spend downs because there's a gift involved. So they're eligible on every other term except for the gift or the improper transfer. So the case breakdown sort of looks like this here. You can maybe kind of move some of these calculations around a little bit, but I generally kind of do it this way. I like to establish first that there is an income shortfall by taking the nursing home cost and subtracting the gross income. And then after that, assuming that there is a significant shortfall there, that we're going to create what's referred to as the burn rate, which is taking the income shortfall and adding the state penalty divisor to that figure. The burn rate is a difficult term to define. The best way I look at it is it's a ratio between what the client can gift and what the client needs for the annuity, essentially. So a lot of people describe it as a figure used to determine how long it's going to take for the client to burn through their spend down assets before they qualify for Medicaid. So so either way, I think both explanations sort of work, but I think from our purposes, it is kind of like a ratio because it'll give you an indicator. Like if the divisor is higher than the shortfall, the gift should probably be higher than the annuity in these cases, and vice versa. If the shortfall is greater than the divisor, then the annuity is probably going to be greater because you need more net annuity to cover that shortfall. That's what the burn rate represents. Any explanations outside of that, I think, would probably cause more confusion versus less. So it's definitely an assumed variable as part of this process here. And then calculating the spend down is more straightforward, just taking accountable assets and then subtracting the Medicaid applicant's resource allowance. And then from there, step 4 is establishing the penalty period, which is simply taking the spend down figure in step 3 and dividing it by the burn rate established in step 2. And then after that, the burn rate's gone. Don't have to worry about that anymore. Step 5, once we establish the appropriate penalty for your client's particular cases, we're going to calculate the gift amount. The gift amount is simply taking the penalty period and multiplying it by the state penalty divisor. So penalty period is a variable that's going to be consistent with the number of months in which someone is ineligible for Medicaid. So if you get a penalty period that says 5, that's assumed that the penalty period will be 5 months, because the divestment penalty divisor is a monthly figure as well. So that sometimes it's a daily figure, but a lot of what we typically do for our calculation is we convert that into a monthly figure and then calculate our proposal from there. But these are monthly figures that we're dealing with. So a penalty period, if you get, like I said, if you get 5, it should be 5 months. So you'd have a 5-month penalty, and because the divisor again is a 1-month figure, 5 times the 1 month penalty figure is going to get you a 5-month penalty, 5-month gift, essentially, whatever the gift is needed to create that 5-month penalty. So sorry for that long-winded explanation there, but let's go to step 6 here, which is the calculation of the Medicaid annuity. So we'll see here where the annuity sort of comes into play. Step 6 through 10 essentially is going to show you where the annuity really comes into play in this type of plan. So the annuity is simply done by taking the spend down less the gift. So once we establish our spend down in step 3, we realize that the spend down is going to consist of the gift and the annuity and nothing else. And then at that point, you would run a quote through our office to establish what the new income is, or what the monthly income payment is going to be from that annuity. And you always want the term of that Medicaid annuity to be consistent with the penalty period. So if you have a 5-month penalty, almost always you're going to have a 5-month annuity term. So when we get to the new monthly income, that's simply taking the original gross monthly income and adding the Medicaid compliant annuity payment there to get our new monthly income. And then step 8 is going to be a great checkpoint for you, because this is going to be the new shortfall calculation. So again, one of the main things is maintaining that income eligibility. And a great way to do that in this step is to make sure that we still have a shortfall. So again, we take the nursing home cost of care in this scenario and subtract the new monthly income established in step 7. So assuming we pass that checkpoint, then we can proceed to step 9. If you don't pass that checkpoint in step 8, then you need to go back to step 4 and reevaluate your penalty period from there, because then you got to kind of play and toy with the numbers a little bit to make that happen. But once you get past that checkpoint, you can go to step 9, which is simply calculating the planned shortfall. That is taking the new monthly shortfall in step 8 and multiplying it by the penalty period. So again, if it's that 5-month penalty, then it's going to create the planned shortfall over the entire plan length. And then the economic result we calculate at the end to show the client what they're saving relative to whether or not, if they do nothing, they're essentially going to lose everything. So we show them what they're going to save in the end. So let's go ahead and apply some figures here, because I always feel like the best way to kind of show this is in like a live, pretend case, basically. So we have a scenario where Mrs. Johnson is an Ohio resident. She has $100,000 in countable assets, a nursing home bill of $8,000, and gross income of $1,000. And in this scenario, she's looking to apply for Medicaid for April 1st, get that penalty period started on April 1st. So I think up until this point, we've done everything we need to do to pay off any sort of debts or outstanding expenses, get the nursing home or facility paid up through the end of March, and take care of any other legal issues that would hinder us from doing this transaction in the month of March. So this is really kind of the last phase of the process right before we file the Medicaid application. So taking a look at step 1 here. Step 1 here is this bullet point where we take the nursing home bill and subtract the gross income. So we do have a $7,000 income shortfall here. And then we also have a burn rate of $14,453. That's taking the income shortfall in step 1 and adding the Ohio divisor, because remember, we were doing an Ohio specific case here. If you're in Pennsylvania, for example, your divisor would be the $12,160.58. I know that by heart because I do a lot of Pennsylvania gifting plans. So that one's pretty well ingrained or emblazoned in my mind there. So yeah, depending what your state divisor is, it'll impact the plan. And then step 3 here, we have the countable assets of $100,000. We're going to subtract that resource allowance of $1,800, and we're only subtracting 1,800 because we want to avoid the edge of Medicaid eligibility. So we don't want to leave your client the maximum resource allowance. We want to give them a little bit of a buffer so that if there's any, dollar cent fluctuations in the account between the annuity purchase and the Medicaid application date, we want to make sure that won't negatively impact the plan. So we get a spend down of $96,700. So let me go back here really quick. So this is steps 1 through 3. When I went through steps 1 through 10 before, these are going to be steps. Step 1 right here in this bullet point. Step 2 is the shortfall, the burn rate calculation, and then step 3 is the spend down. So when we get to the next slide, this whole slide is going to be pertinent to step 4. So we calculate a penalty of 7 months. How did we do that? We took the spend down of $96,700 and divided it by the burn rate of $14,453. We actually got a number of 6.69 months, but in almost every case, we get a penalty like this. We're going to round that up to 7 months for a couple reasons. Number one, we want to increase the plan shortfall. So we can do 6.69 month penalty and multiply that by the divisor. We can certainly do that. But then you run the risk of having a tighter shortfall with the annuity payments versus just rounding it up to 7 months. You're going to have a higher gift and a smaller annuity, and thus a more comfortable shortfall. So I always kind of do that as a rule of thumb. And then the other reason, and probably the more important reason, is that we have encountered scenarios over the years, both Amber and myself, we've been doing this long enough where we've uncovered situations where we are not entirely comfortable doing gifting plans where the annuity term exceeds the penalty period. So if we want anything exceeding the other, we want the penalty to be longer than the annuity. So like we can have scenarios where maybe we have a 7 month annuity term, but then the penalty is like 7.12 months. That's okay. But like if it's reversed where the annuity term is 7 months and the penalty is 6.69, there is a potential risk for having a abnormally large co-payment for the first month of eligibility that sort of reduces the economic benefit. So we tend to err on the side of caution with our planning cases to avoid that if the state were to ever take that type of position when evaluating the annuity income for their first month of eligibility. And that's probably a little bit more of a sophisticated conversation down the road, but for simplicity purposes, in that step, I would just round up most of the time to 7 months and just follow the rule that the term of the annuity should not exceed the penalty period. So just wanted to clarify that. We're still kind of, in a basic planning presentation, didn't want to get too far in the weeds on something. So here's step 5 and step 6 of the calculations. Step 5 is determining the gift amount of $52,171, and you see that's done by again taking the penalty period and multiplying it by the state penalty divisor. And then the annuity premium is just going to be the difference between the spend down and the gift, and we get $44,529. So in our illustration, all right, there we go. I went back the wrong way. Sorry about that. So here's the next page here. Still in step 6, we're doing the annuity illustration. This is the type of illustration you would see from our office. So if you email me, say, hey, Stuart, I need to run an illustration on a $44,529 premium, term 7 months. This is what would kick out to you. I would email this to you. And the main thing, there's 2 things I think that I want to take out from this illustration that you get from us on a case-by-case basis. You want to know what the monthly payment is for sure, because you want to be able to know what you're inputting into the Medicaid application for income, but you also want to do that checkpoint in step 7 and step 8. So this is the monthly payment. This is $6,369.78 from the annuity. The other thing you want to point out that I love pointing out is you have another sort of checkpoint here when you run the illustration through us, is you want to make sure that the total payout figure here, this is why we put it out there, this is why we emphasize it and make it important when we run the illustration, is you want to make sure the total payout number here is larger than the single premium number here, so that when you know that that's true, you know that there is a positive rate of return with that annuity, which is important for the actuarial sound test. So that's another way of knowing and verifying that our annuities, which I know is probably a simple verification at this point for most everybody, because we've been doing these long enough to where we know that there's one interest rate applied to every single case here. So that shouldn't be an issue, but I think when you're doing your due diligence, you just want to make sure that every single time it's just like oh, okay, all right, total payouts greater than a premium. Just want to make sure you go over that every single time so that you know that it's that is providing that positive rate of return that you need for your client. All right, and then this slide here is going to go over all the remaining steps, 7 through 10. So step 7 here is the new income, which is done again by taking the gross income and adding the Medicaid compliant annuity payment. And then step 8, we're calculating our new monthly income shortfall, which we still have a shortfall here because the nursing home is $8,000, and we're subtracting the new income, which is the $7,369.78. So $630.22, I think, is a really great shortfall. It might be a little too conservative for some people, which I certainly understand. We generally go by a $200 shortfall, $200 monthly shortfall on our gifting plan cases. There's other states where we do significantly more conservative shortfalls as well. I know with New Jersey, we'll do like a 28-day month instead of assuming like a 30-day month. So we definitely take into an extra level of conservativity, is that a word, with these proposals. But then just to make sure we're not jeopardizing that income eligibility. So this is a good number here, I think, for Ohio and probably for a lot of states, $630. So I would feel very comfortable with this type of plan recommendation. So step 9, step 10 are just really easy here at this point. You got the shortfall, total plan for shortfall of just over $4,400 by taking the proposed penalty period and multiplying it by the new shortfall. And then our net benefit for the plan is going to be the $47,559 here. And that's done by simply taking the gift amount and subtracting the total plan shortfall established in step 9. So this is step 10 here. And the other thing to add to the net benefit that's not on this list here is the $1,800 resource allowance. If the giftees are making all the payments from the shortfall, then it makes sense that the $1,800 will still be there. So the net benefit becomes closer to around $50,000, which is pretty much precisely half of what their total assets were, or what Ms. Johnson's total assets were. All right. And so here's the final slide here regarding this, and we're going to go into spousal planning for a little bit, is that because I want to always illustrate the timeline, because people sometimes get confused by the timing of these types of transactions. So as I mentioned, we're looking to get the penalty started April 1st. So assuming that to be the case, we also want the Medicaid compliant annuity payment to start in April as well. So we'll have the first payment on the annuity commencing on April 1st, and a penalty will start on April 1st. The annuity contract will be issued in March, or purchased in March, first payment in April. And then for a period of 7 months, the contract from April to October is going to continue to provide monthly payments, and then the penalty is going to continue to be served. When you get to the month of October, this is month 7 of the penalty. This is where also the last annuity payment is going to be made. So when we get to November, month 8, the penalty and the annuity are over. So there's no more annuity payments to be had, and there's no more penalties. So Medicaid benefits should be beginning on November 1st. And that's how the annuity works in a gift and annuity plan, basically, or a single person case plan. All right, so let's go over the traditional community spouse plan and how the annuity works in this scenario. So basically, in a community spouse case, we have the exact same scenario as the single Medicaid applicant. The only difference is that we have a healthy spouse that is at home or living in the community. So all the other income and asset requirements are the same in these types of scenarios. Just we got to account for a community spouse. So the plan in these types of scenarios is typically to qualify the Medicaid applicant for benefits immediately. and then provide the healthy spouse with sufficient income and resources to live comfortably in the community. And then we also part of this process is to spend down with the Medicaid compliant annuity, which will achieve us asset eligibility. And then also I'll show you how we're able to obtain income eligibility in this process as well. So in this scenario, there's no gifting. There's no gifting here, unless if you're probably in Alabama. I could see most likely a gifting scenario there because the rules are definitely different in that particular state. But mostly every other state, I think primarily we do a traditional community spouse planning. So the first thing we want to do in this type of scenario is to identify what's referred to as the snapshot date. And this is the first date of continuous institutionalization for the Medicaid applicant. So meaning that they would have been in the facility for 30 consecutive days or more. So a lot of times the snapshot date, even if the first date of continuous institutionalization, maybe it's March 12th, maybe that's the day one. A lot of states may bump that back up to the first. So it's like just get a snapshot of the assets on the first day of the month in which they entered, or first day of the month in which the snapshot was verified. But each state might be a little bit different on that. So you may want to just make sure that whatever state you're in, you're adhering to what their rules are with the snapshot date. So once we establish that snapshot date, and the other thing we want to do here, which I'm going to get into, but I'm going to say it now because I think it's important to articulate it now, is that we want to gather a snapshot of what their assets are on that particular date, because that's going to come in handy for a lot of different states here in calculating the CSRA, or what's also known as the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. So just like its name, it's basically the resources that the community spouse is allowed to have and still qualify his or her spouse for Medicaid benefits. So in calculating the CSRA, because the CSRA is the complicated part for some states, step one with the snapshot, you establish that there's really no gray, really should be no gray area with that. Maybe a little bit complicated in gathering the actual snapshot of the assets, but step two, calculating the CSRA, is what's different from state to state. And there's really only two different ways of calculating the CSRA. So I really kind of identify them as max only states and minimum maximum states. So the question that I would have for each of you is, does your state have a minimum and maximum CSRA? If your answer is no, your calculation is super easy, because that means you only have one resource limit for the community spouse, and that oftentimes is the 157,920. So a lot of times those cases are very easy peasy for you all. So if you answer no to that question, you might see that these instructions that I'm going to go over are pretty foreign to you. But still probably good if you wanted to learn what other states are doing and what they have to go through, so that maybe you can kind of sit back and be like, oh, and count my blessings that I'm in a state that I don't have to go through this process. But if your state that says yes, you do have a minimum and maximum, we do have a little bit more calculation to do to determine exactly what your resource allowance is. It's really not that bad, but it's, always when there's less work to do, it's always good to count your blessings and realize that, hey, maybe I don't have it so bad. So like Georgia, if you're doing spousal planning in Georgia, you might be thankful that you only have the 157,920 here. And just to back up, these are our Medicaid guides that you can find on our Ashburn website. If you just go to ashburn.com, and I believe it's under tools and resources, I think that's the name of the tab, and then state resources, I believe is what it is. I may not have it verbatim word for word, but if you look at these Medicaid guides, it'll show you the difference between the two different states. New Jersey has a minimum maximum, you can see right here. Minimum's 130 or 31,584, and the maximum ones is 157,920. And then, like I said, Georgia's just the 157,920. So Georgia attorneys, for example, I believe Colorado's already just a max only state, so you don't necessarily have to worry about calculations there. There's other states too. It would take me a minute to think of all of them, but New Jersey's a state, Pennsylvania is certainly a state, Ohio, Michigan, states that all have the minimum maximum. And most states in across the country have the minimum maximum here. So more states are like New Jersey than they are like Georgia, but we're going to go over now the actual calculation here and show you that it's not too difficult. It's just once you kind of understand the fact that the minimum and maximum CSRAs, it's nothing more than just a range of where your specific client's CSRA might land. So like Georgia, regardless, if they have $100,000 in assets, the CSRA is 157. If they have $600,000 in assets, it's 157,920. Same across the board. But in a state like New Jersey that have the minimum maximum, you have to do one simple calculation. You have to take the snapshot assets that I told you to gather in step 1. Take those snapshot assets and divide them by 2. That's all you have to do. And so for our purposes here, I'm going to label that quotient X because we're doing division. I gotta, use the proper mathematical term quotient here. So the division of the snapshot assets by 2 is going to get X. And so X, once we have that calculation, is going to fall into 3 different solutions. And I labeled them A, B, or C. So you're going to take X and you're going to apply it to the range in your state. So if X is greater than the maximum CSRA, then the CSRA is going to be the 157,920. So like if your snapshot assets, for example, are $400,000 and you divide it by 2, X is $200,000. That means step A is applicable to where the resource allowance, even though X is $200,000, the max CSRA is only 157,920. For step B, if X is less than the minimum CSRA, then the CSRA is going to be the minimum, the 31,584. And then lastly, probably where more scenario, this is part B is probably the rarest, but part C seems to be pretty relevant a lot of times. If you have snapshot assets divided by 2 and that quotient X is in between the minimum and maximum, then your CSRA is going to be X. So in that same scenario where I said if they have a $200,000 snapshot date and you divide that by 2, it's $100,000, then in a min-max state, that CSRA is going to be equal to X. All right, so obviously that's probably the most complicated part of this process because everything else is easy peasy. Calculating the spend down is merely taking the current assets, not the snapshot assets, the current assets, and subtracting the community spouse resource allowance and also the Medicaid applicant resource allowance. And then simply speaking, once we get our spend down, the spend down is going to equal the Medicaid compliant annuity. So other things you can subtract from current assets could be home upgrades, upgrading your vehicle, processing fee for the annuity, legal fees, buying a irrevocable funeral trust or whole life insurance policy, stuff like that, that your debts, that you may want to pay off. Maybe not every scenario, there may not be every scenario where it's better to pay off a debt, but judge it on case by case scenario. But when we finally get to that final spend down number, that's going to be our MCA premium. All right, so let's go ahead and go into an example here and then we'll call it a day. So I know everyone's probably absorbing a lot of information right now, so I appreciate you hanging on there with me, and promise I will try to be as clear as I can on this. And just feel free, if you have any questions that are coming right now, just feel free to send them in. We'll have plenty of time at the end to answer them. I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning, but nonetheless, feel free to throw any questions in there that you have, and certainly Amber and I will be able to answer them at the end. But for this particular case here, we have another client named the Johnsons. This is a case where we are in the state of New Jersey instead of Ohio. So Mr. Johnson is a nursing home resident and entered the nursing home on January 1st and has stayed there on a continuous basis. So we know that January 1 is the snapshot date because he's been there since January 1. Now, Mr. Johnson's nursing home bill is $8,000. His gross income is $2,000. $8,000 is kind of a generous nursing home bill, if I'm being honest, in New Jersey. It's probably more likely that that's $13,000, $14,000, $15,000 a month, but kind of kept consistent with the Ohio numbers, so I apologize for that. But yeah, It'd be a very friendly nursing home bill, probably more associated with like an assisted living facility would be my guess. All right, so the Johnsons together have a snapshot assets of $300,000. So on January 1st, they had $300,000. Currently, as of March 12th, the Johnsons have $250,000 because maybe they wanted to upgrade their vehicle, make upgrades to their home as well, whatever the case may be. So Mrs. Johnson's date of birth is February 12th, 1938, and that's going to be important for a reason when we get into the analysis of the quote. And she also has a gross income of $2,000. So here is the process of calculating the CSRA and determining the amount of the annuity in this case. So we have the snapshot date of January 1, 2025. So, and then step 2 here, we're going to determine the CSRA. So the snapshot assets, again, $300,000 divided by 2 is equal to X. So that means X equals $150,000. Also what that means is X is less than $157,920, but greater than the minimum. I think I have the wrong number on there. I think it's 584. So that's a typo on my part, I think. But anyway, it is obviously still greater than either one of those numbers, definitely greater than the minimum. So in this case, CSRA is going to be equal to X because it's less than 157.90. So after the CSRA, we're going to determine what the protected resource allowance is. I really didn't mention that term quite yet, but this is the other part, but it's a very straightforward, simplistic part here. We take the combined resource allowance, which is $152,000, and that's just the community spouse resource allowance of $150 plus the Medicaid applicant's resource allowance of $2,000. So the combined resource allowance 152. We're going to adjust that number to 147. Again, going back to our gifting plan where we left only 1,800 for resources, we're going to leave 147 in this case because we also want to avoid the edge of Medicaid eligibility. So that does come into play again on this type of plan. And then lastly, calculating the spend down, we're taking the 250,000 and we're subtracting the protected resource allowance. And that's going to get us an MCA premium of $103,000. All right, so here's the illustration. And here's the main difference between, I shouldn't say main difference, there's differences, but the main annuity difference for a gifting plan versus a community spouse plan is that the community spouse has options for their term length. In a single person case, the applicant is restricted to using the term that is relatively equal to what the penalty period is. In this scenario, the term can be more subjective and can depend. So I ran 3 different quotes here, verified that all 3 of these payouts are greater than the premium. So if the client proceed with any one of these cases, I would say actuarially sound, we're good to go. I think also the monthly payments on these annuities are pretty reasonable, even in a state like New Jersey, certainly, but like even like $8,600 per month on a 12-month term is not that unrealistic to see on an annuity like this. So I would be comfortable potentially recommending these, any one of these terms to the client. Now, there's one caveat here in the next slide. I'll get into this in more detail here, but and this is why we asked for Mrs. Johnson's date of birth, because we evaluate her life expectancy for an 87-year-old female to be 69.84 months. So thinking of it just from like a 30,000-foot view perspective, choosing a 48-month annuity for an 87-year-old might be a little bit more risky than say someone who's 77 years old. 77-year-olds projected to probably live longer than an 87-year-old. But even if that 87-year-old is relatively healthy, I think you're kind of at that age where it's like you still want to get those funds back as quickly as possible, so you're not subjecting them to potential state recovery from the annuity, or you're reducing that risk basically. So I wanted to do a slide specifically about how to choose the correct term for your community spouse in these cases. So the first thing I think is the simplest is establishing what term options you have. And so with Mrs. Johnson's life expectancy, we cannot exceed a term of 69 months, but we can do anything less than that. So technically speaking, we could do an annuity as short as 2 months or an annuity as long as 69 months, and we would still be actuarially sound. But I think from that perspective, you also want to be very cautious about what is okay and what isn't in your state. And I know that can even vary from county to county or even from attorney to attorney. Different attorneys have different levels of comfort when it comes to these types of situations. And I would always say if you have an inkling one way or the other, it is better to be more cautious than to try to do something that you're like, I haven't done this before. I don't know if it's going to be okay. So it's always better to be longer with the term than shorter, because the worst case scenario with that most likely is that if they predeceased the term of the annuity, the state might be entitled to recover something from some form of annuity benefit or death benefit from that annuity. Whereas if you go too low, you might be subjected to a heavily scrutinized application, which could result in a denial and create a lot more issues. So we definitely don't want to go too short. So I feel like a 2-month annuity is definitely way too short for the Johnson's case, but something like a 12-month annuity, I think, or 24-month, I think is something where I'd feel a lot more comfortable with something like that, but probably less than 12 months, I would probably feel relatively uneasy about recommending that. Also, a few things to consider when choosing the correct term. What is the annuity premium? Are the funds pre-tax dollars or after tax? Are you using an IRA for this? Because if it's a pre-tax account, then 100% of the annuity is going to be taxable. So spreading that out over a longer term is usually beneficial. So like higher premiums and pre-tax money is going to be your ticket towards recommending a longer term essentially. But non-qualified money, smaller premiums, we can be a little bit more assertive with a shorter term to get that money back more quickly. And then also we want to evaluate the community spouse's overall health and general life expectancy. That's another reason why we bring in the Medicaid life expectancy on this. But again, when you're looking at a client's age too, and they're in that 80s and especially mid 80s, I feel relatively uncomfortable choosing longer terms, because you kind of never know with those individuals. It can be sort of just like you never know when something might happen. So a few other things to consider here in the spend down process. We want to be able to, when you're ready to spend down, you want to be able to identify what assets need to be moved and where they need to go, basically. So if you've got funds in certain accounts, whether we're doing a gifting plan or spousal annuity, being able to figure out account management, what accounts need to stay open, what accounts can be consolidated, things like that. And then what are the funds we need for the MCA? And then do we have a funeral policy in place? Can we do a quick whole life insurance policy? Does your state allow transfers to pooled trusts where you can have like a little maintenance account? I do caution people on pooled trusts just because there is also a payback provision with those. So if you overfund them, that could potentially leave the client's assets subject to state recovery as well too. So I just caution you to be a little bit conservative on pooled trusts as well as a technique, but I think it's a good rainy day fund to kind of have, for expenses that Medicaid may not be able to pick up. And then also with retirement accounts, we want to see what type of account they have. Is it an IRA or is it an employer-sponsored plan? Is it a non-qualified annuity that maybe we need to spend on as well too? And then also for the Medicaid application, a couple things to consider is we want to make sure the forms are obviously signed and the checks are cut in the month of spend down, basically. So assuming that happens, then I don't see any issues with being able to file that Medicaid application. But for the annuity, we're going to do everything we can on our end to make sure it's filled out to the best of the client's ability. and make sure that it's signed and issued in the appropriate time frame. And then I think I may have already talked about some of this stuff, but the annuity is issued typically with American Century on the date the application is signed. So as long as the forms are signed in the month of spend down, we can make sure that the issue date is in that specific month. And then we want to verify the client's date of birth, and we go through that process too when we're evaluating applications to make sure it is actuarially sound. And then again, ensure the state is listed as beneficiary. We typically have the state, the department name, type of benefits paid, and then to whom they can collect benefits paid on behalf of. So if you've never worked with us before, we typically have the language already in our application documents because that's what's proven to work in those states in the past. So really, we kind of take care of that for you. But you know, if you're an attorney that's done this before and experienced, you can change that language to whatever you want. But you know, we have you guys kind of covered either way. On that for whatever language you want to use. And then again, you know, with you know, just kind of recapping all this, and you know, we kind of talked about this earlier on. If you have clients with annuities that aren't purchased through our office, or you know, is not one that you're familiar with, feel free to always send that over to us so we can provide an analysis as to how that can impact your client's plan. I never like to be too brazen and call myself an expert, but you know, I've been doing annuity cases for over 10 years on a day in and day out basis. Amber's been doing it for almost 20. And, you know, so like we definitely have the experience needed to kind of, you know, lend that advice, you know, for you in the, you know, when that scenario kind of comes around. So I think with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Amber, and we can kind of go over any questions that may have come up and anything else before we depart for today.
Thank you, Stuart. It looks like the only question that we have is related to an individual case. We had a question about what the resource allowance is, and I can go ahead and answer that. That's normally just the amount of assets or liquid assets that a person is able to keep in their name that Medicaid will allow for. So this person is reaching out to us from Illinois, and Illinois is actually pretty generous in the resource allowance for an individual. It's currently $17,500 that an individual Medicaid applicant is able to keep in their name. And so that's a separate amount that the person does not have to spend down in order to be eligible for Medicaid. And then anything above the resource allowance would be used to either gift or purchase an annuity so that we're able to meet the asset and income test for Medicaid.
Yep, and I think it kind of ends up becoming like a maintenance account. I think I mentioned that with the pool trust a little bit, that some states will utilize. But having that individual resource allowance is always good for like non-medical expenses or stuff that you know, the Medicaid's not covering, but you know, they still have the 2,000, or if you're in another state like Illinois that, you know, lets you keep a lot more, they may treat that as like a maintenance account so that they can cover other things that Medicaid might not foot the bill for.
Mm-hmm. And I was also going to mention, if you are newer to doing Medicaid planning and you have questions about the appropriate time frame for a spousal annuity, we can kind of give you guidance on what other terms we've seen in your state as far as whether other law firms are currently doing like 6-month annuities, 12 months, things of that nature. So if you do have questions related to what is the right time frame to structure a spousal annuity for, you can always reach out to Stuart or I, and we're happy to answer those questions. Stuart, did you have anything that you wanted to close with? Otherwise, I'm not seeing any other questions. If anybody thinks of questions afterwards, Stuart's contact information is on the screen, but I don't have anything else unless you do.
No, I think I definitely kind of covered a lot here, and I thank everybody for coming on, and then also just kind of be on the lookout for our webinars in Q2. I think we're doing attorney-led presentations for April, May, and June on some interesting topics. So definitely be on the lookout for that as well. over the next coming weeks and months.
Yes. Thank you, Stuart. Great job. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And we will hopefully talk to you soon.